Joining us live in Mobile, Alabama, as our guy Keith Jackson would say, is none other than Ric Serritella. Go give him the follow at Ric Serritella. Boots on the ground in Mobile. If you don't already know it as a football guy, this is Senior Bowl week. Big, arguably the best All-Star game from an NFL draft standpoint. But Ric, I appreciate you joining us, guy. Man, how's everything going? Ric's over there from the NFL Draft Bible. Been doing the NFL draft analysis since 2002. That's a lot longer than most people. But Ric, I appreciate you taking the time. How's everything down in Mobile?
Hey, Dave, I'm loving it, man. Thanks for having me on. You know, Mobile, it's the who's who of the NFL industry, right? You get all kinds of types from the agent community, scouting community, player community, and you know, we're not going to have the Grand Poobah Nick Saban make an appearance this week, or he hasn't so far. But,
yeah.
You know, the SEC is representing very well, man. I'll tell you, the first thing I noticed, and I've made all the trips along the All-Star circuit from the Hula Bowl and the Tropical Bowl, the Shrine Bowl, and now the Senior Bowl. But you get the SEC body types in the trenches out here in Mobile, and it's just different. And the talent is in the trenches this year at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, Ric, I mean, me and you haven't had a formal chance to really ever meet in person, but I've heard a lot of great things about you from Neil. And I worked in college football for about 9 years, but my point, I'm piggybacking off what you said. You're 100% right. Went from the SEC to the Big 12, and you're right, the bodies on the line of scrimmage, I think where people have never seen those bodies up close and personal, I think that's the big adjustment from when you transition maybe from the Big 12 to the SEC or ACC to the SEC outside of Clemson for the first couple of years. But who's some guys that from a good way so far, let's start off with some good news, who's some guys that have stood out from you from the SEC so far in a short week? Because today's the last day of practice, right?
Yeah, today's the last day of practice. We had 2 days of padded practice, and they were really popping the first 2 days. This third day here was a little bit more of a walkthrough style, but I'll start off in the trenches because Emory Jones, I thought, did really well for himself out of LSU. I think he's going to be a starter at the next level. His kick slide allows him to kind of keep up with just about every pass rusher out here. He can bend pretty well for his size. And again, you know, he just lines them up and holds his ground rep after rep. So I thought he did very well for himself. And then, you know, on the other side of the ball, like it's interesting, Cameron Jackson from Florida and Deontay Walker from Kentucky, both of these guys are in the same group. And obviously very different body types, but just two massive men. And it's interesting to see them go one after another because Walker, you know, I got to be honest, like he's out here playing patty cake a lot of times. He gets stood up and you really don't see a lot of push or force, but there's a lot of love in the scouting community because he's going to take up two gaps every single play. He's a space eater. He's going to take on two bodies and he's going to allow other guys to make plays around him. And so, you know, I think there's a lot of love for Deontay Walker, but Cameron Jackson, I mean, this guy can play for me all day long. I mean, he is a Mack truck coming at you. He must have weighed in at over 350 pounds, and he's got a quick get off. He fires low off of the ball, and he's really had a solid week.
Yeah, you had me thinking. You mentioned Emory Jones, right? You like him on the inside? You like him at a guard spot? You think his upside's at guard over tackle where he played mostly in college?
You know what? I think he can. I think he's going to have a shot to play right tackle. And if it doesn't work out, you got yourself a very good guard. But he's taken a lot of reps at right tackle out here in Mobile. And, I mean, he's done just as good of a job as any offensive lineman I've seen.
Yeah, so that's what I figured. Also, too, when you go back and watch I think you nailed it, Ric. I 100% agree with you. With your take on Deion Walker, you see him flash in games against Ole Miss, Georgia. You see that motor that he's got to consistently play with. But to your point, you go see games against Vanderbilt, even South Carolina this year where they got whipped in that game in Lexington. You feel like he takes some plays off. It plays up and down to competition. I feel like from an NFL personnel person is yourself.
To that point, yeah. Well, so he went up against the Coastal Carolina offensive lineman, Willie Lampkin out here. Willie Lampkin's 5'11". Stood him up.
Yeah.
Stonewalled him. I mean, you know, and so you see plays like that and you kind of scratch your head. But, I mean, you just can't teach those kind of traits, 6'7", 340. And, you know, again, I think he's going to be a top 50 overall selection.
Again, guys, Ric Serritella joining us over here from All Access Football, the Draft Bible. I mean, you're missing out a ton of great football stuff. Give him the follow at Ric Serritella, folks. Again, now let's transition. I know a lot of us, again, I'm with you. I like watching the big guys, but I think a lot of people want to know about quarterbacks, the gunslingers. I think the most important position in all of football, and I think probably in all of sports. You can't win big without one of them.
You still have my audio because I lost you there, but I think, okay, yeah, I think I got the question about the quarterbacks. Like, you know, one of the things that stood out to me was like we saw Riley Leonard's performance in the college football playoffs, and I expected him to be much bigger, but standing next to Jackson Dart from Ole Miss, Jackson Dart actually had a more thick frame than a Riley Leonard. So I was surprised to see that, like his calves and his ankles and, you know, even his upper body. I felt like Jackson Dart had a pretty sturdy frame. And, you know, he offers a skill set that's very appealing to the next level. So, unfortunately, neither Jackson Dart or Jalen Milroe has kind of taken the bull by the horns. I think that's probably been one of the biggest disappointments from this week. If you want to take a key takeaway, is like no quarterback has really stepped up and kind of commanded that QB3 label after Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward. We thought, you know, Jalen Milroe might come out here and light it up. It hasn't exactly been the case, but also, like, we're not going to knock them or downgrade them for it either, because it's just so hard to work with wide receivers that you don't know. And, you know, the first day is kind of a throwaway day. You're kind of feeling guys out, learning the timing down, the different receivers, sizes, speed. So it's a lot, but we have seen quarterbacks come down here and improve their draft stock. And I do think Milroe is a guy, like, once they take the field on Saturday, I mean, he could come out here and win Senior Bowl MVP, and suddenly it's all good again. But, yeah, I think, you know, I would have liked to have seen more from all the quarterbacks out here. But that's kind of what I got for you in terms of Milroe and Dart.
Yeah, Ric, you told me. I feel like, how much are you taking from, because again, you've done this longer than me, how much are you really taking from these settings down in Mobile? You mentioned it. You don't have that kind of like precision timing with the wide receivers. How much are you weighing, maybe not an exact percentage compared to like what you're seeing on the film? The film doesn't lie, the 12, 13, 14, depending on how many games you play at the college football playoff from these quarterbacks. And how much are you really like putting stock in this week from the practice reps compared to that?
You know, you got to take every player base by base, because when you're talking about 170 invites out here, I know some dropped out. But, you know, you cross-check guys that you know. You discover new guys that you got to go back and go dig in afterwards. And then, you know, what's the point I wanted to make? There was a lot of guys rattling through my head here. But what I was going to say is that you've got to take some things with a grain of salt. But then here's where I wanted to go, Dave. It's what happens between the reps. It's the intangibles. It's, you know, are you picking a guy up when he makes a mistake, or are you encouraging him? You know, Eugene Asante, this guy out of Auburn. You know, the best thing about the all-star platforms is the alpha dogs. The cream rises are always to the top. You got the who's who of all over the country, the best of the best, the team captains, the All-Americans, but there's always an alpha dog. Who's the alpha male that all the other alphas look up to? And that's Eugene Asante. And I think you got to kind of say, hey, you put that down in your notes. Like, this guy, he talks the talk, he walks the walk. The players gravitate towards him. He's a dog. He flashed some pass rush repertoire. He can cover. He makes a hit. You hear the echo, like the pads are popping. So, like, there's a guy, Eugene Asante. I think he did very well for himself. And, you know, you just got to cross-check. Guys come out here. They don't weigh in what you think they do, or maybe they weigh in more than you think they do. And, you know, it's a great apples-to-apples comparison. And, you know, I know it's an SEC show, but then it's also a great opportunity for some of these small school guys and FCS guys to get, you know, this is their Super Bowl, right? Like, they get to go against an SEC caliber kind of talent. So, like, when the North Dakota State kid comes out here and lines up against SEC, he's showing himself, like, hey, the level of competition is not a problem. And I think that's kind of why you got to take it case by case.
Does it kind of shock you when you're out there and you're seeing some of these schools, like you mentioned, like non-SEC, non-Big Ten, where they have these big bodies on the line of scrimmage? But like, let's just say like North Dakota State at some point, what is it, like this is their fourth Senior Bowl in a row. They've had an offensive lineman come to this thing. Like, is there anything from the evaluation process where you're like, man, how are these bigger schools missing on these guys that can, these schools like a North Dakota State that's consistently having like almost an offensive line pipeline into this all-star game? And you see consistently, I think the offensive line play across the sport's gotten worse, and especially at the Power 5 or Power 4 level at times. Does that ever come across like, man, where'd they miss on him? Again, every situation is different, but I wanted your insight on that.
Well, I do think that there's fewer small school prospects because if the Power 4 guys do miss, they're discovering them and they're offering them NIL. I think in the case of like a Gray Zabel from North Dakota State, I think they do a good job of recruiting the in-state talent and keeping those guys in-house, especially on the offensive line, because they got somewhat of a reputation, to your point. Like, they've had an offensive lineman drafted, I think, each of the last 4 years. And so some of these guys, you know, the North Dakota State program, these guys will stay loyal. And for whatever it's worth, that Gray Zabel, I mean, I think he might be the best player out here. I think he could be a potential first-round pick, and he's been dominating the competition. So good for that. Good for that young man.
Yeah, and again, a couple more questions before we get you out of here. Walter Nolan, how's he looked this year? Sorry, not this year. This week out in Mobile.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. Like I glance over at the Twitterverse every now and then, and I see people tweeting stuff I just don't see out here. And I think, you know, Walter Nolan is definitely a next level. Like, he's a premier talent out here. I think he's one of the top players, but he didn't really come out here and dominate. I think he came out here and showed that he has superior athleticism. He came in a little bit light, 6'3", 293. So I think that kind of hurt him a little bit in terms of weigh-ins and measurements. I thought teams wanted to see him come in at 300 pounds. But he was pretty agile, and he's got a quick get off. So I still think he's in that first round equation without a doubt. And he's one of the top talents here. And then Shamar Stewart, you know, he's flashed. He's had some moments, but he's also had some bad moments. Yeah. And times where he's, you know, he's dominated, and he's also been dominated. But I saw, like, he was trending the other day as the best player down here in Mobile. I didn't see that, but I do see a guy who could sneak into the back end of the first round. Absolutely.
Rick, last question, kind of a combination of two. Again, I appreciate you joining us. Most surprising player in a good way this week? It can be anybody. It doesn't have to be an SEC player. And most surprising player from a negative perspective this week?
Oh, well, you're putting me on the spot here. You know, the most surprising player really was the North, because I didn't have a high grade on him. I'll give you another one, too. How about Delaware running back Marcus Yarns? I watched this film, Dave, and I didn't really see anything too spectacular. I wasn't really salivating to come watch him play out here in Mobile, but then he really turned it on. I mean, he in the running and in the passing game, he can create separation. He went out here at the last rep to end out day 2 of the practice one-on-one with one of these linebackers, and just completely left them in the dust. Everybody got a razz out of it, and that was good to see. You know, in terms of disappointment, I don't know. I don't really want to discredit anybody, but I'm sure it'll come back to me. I'll let you know off the air.
Well, I appreciate you joining us, guys. Again, Ric Serritella taking his 10, 15 minutes of his precious time out there that we have out in Mobile, Alabama. I appreciated him joining us again, guys. Ric Serritella, All Access Football CEO, also a contributor over there at the NFL Draft Bible. Give him the follow. Phenomenal football personnel evaluation. Follow at Ric Serritella. Rick, I appreciate you taking the time, dude. I can see it in the background in between practices of the American and national team, man. Honestly, jealous of you. I'm in here sitting inside. Is it temperature? What's the weather out there?
It's been beautiful, man. It's been actually better than the All-Star game weather that we had down in Florida. So every day it's gotten warmer. We're sitting at a nice 70. Breeze not too bad, and you know, I'll be getting ready to buckle up and hunker down back at the snowy Jersey Shore after this.
Well, I appreciate you, man. Thanks, Rick, for taking the time, man. You have a phenomenal rest of the day.
Good stuff, Dave. You want to hop back on after the Senior Bowl? We can chop it up next week, too. Just let me know.
Let's do it, brother. Appreciate you, man. Thank you for your time.
Yeah. Yeah, man.